Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Maximizing Your Marketing ROI Across the Buyer Journey. Today's webinar is being presented by our team here at Hinge. And for those of you unfamiliar with Hinge, we are the leading research-based branding, marketing agency for professional services firms. If your business is searching for a branding, marketing, or website design partner that understands what drives growth for professional services firms in your industry, then we encourage you to visit our website, hingemarketing.com, to start a conversation on how we can help you elevate the performance of your brand. And we're joined in partnership today with our friends over at Big Bang. Big Bang is a consulting firm that helps businesses optimize and streamline their processes by implementing cloud solutions. Their team of highly skilled experts work hand in hand with organizations to achieve exceptional business improvements so that their companies can focus on what they do best rather than on non-value added activities. You can learn more about Big Bang and their services at bigbang360.com. We have a great presentation prepared for you today, so let's begin. If you registered for this webinar, you will receive a recording of today's presentation in your email inbox later today. And since you'll be receiving the recording and a copy of the slides, we ask that you make the most of your presentation time today and use the Q&A feature on your webinar display to ask our presenters your questions. Our priority at Hinge is to give you as much access to our experts as possible. So use that Q&A feature on the control panel, and we will either answer them during the webinar, at the end of the presentation, or by email after we're done. I'd like to now turn and introduce today's wonderful speakers. We have Liz Haar and Kimberly Marks. First, we're joined by Liz Haar, an accomplished entrepreneur and executive specializing in branding and growth strategies for professional services firm. A senior partner at Hinge, she leads Hinge's business development team, helping businesses solve critical marketing and brand-related challenges. Prior to joining Hinge, Liz co-founded a Microsoft solutions provider company and grew it into a thriving organization that became known for its expertise in CRM platforms. Liz has co-authored several books and research reports by the Hinge Research Institute and regularly contributes to Hinge's blog and numerous other professional services publications. Welcome to the webinar, Liz.
Thank you, Austin. It's great to be here.
Absolutely. And I know you and I are both excited to have join us today. I'd like to introduce Kimberly Marks from our partners at Big Bang. At Big Bang, Kim is the Director of Alliances and Marketing, where she handles all internal and external communications, marketing initiatives, and partnerships. Before working at Big Bang, Kim worked at several marketing agencies with a focus on wellness and luxury brands. She is the recipient of a notable award for Best Marketers in Montreal. Well, welcome to the webinar, Kim. We're excited to have you.
Thank you. Looking forward to it. Looking forward to get into the nitty-gritty of marketing today, since at the office, it's mostly technical people.
That's right. My name is Austin. I'll be moderating your questions today. Also, during the presentations, I'll be sending you some links in the chat and special offers that you can access. You're going to want to open that chat just to see those links that I'm sending you. But primarily, you're going to use that Q&A feature to send your questions and your comments for our speakers. Well, thank you, everybody. We are, again, for joining. Liz, I know that we're all excited about today's presentation, especially that we have Kim here with us. Why don't you kick us off with today's agenda?
I will do just that. Thank you, Austin. So yeah, Kim and I are going to spend our time across 3 discussion areas today, and then, of course, invite lots of Q&A. So we'll be watching for what questions that might come in, and we'll spend some time at the end with those. But we're going to open up today's discussion by just talking about why should we even measure the impact that the different areas we're investing in marketing and the techniques we're deploying. Why do we measure the impact of those? And what are the perils of not doing that? I think beyond the obvious, there are some things that we can share that could potentially help teams communicate to their own decision makers about why this investment is just so important. And then we're going to jump into understanding something that is super critical anytime we're determining what type of marketing should we be investing in the first place. And that is, what is our buyer's journey? So we're going to be talking about how to understand, how to think about your buyers and how to understand the journey that they're taking as they learn about you and ultimately select you. And then finally, we're going to wrap it up by, I think everyone out there talks about the buyer journey a little bit differently. There might be 3 phases for some people, 10 phases for another. Well, we've identified 5 distinct stages of the buyer journey. And I'm really excited to get to this section because as we do, Kim and I are going to walk you through what the purpose of that particular stage is, and then what kind of metrics you use to know if you're being impactful at that particular stage. And I'm so excited for that because I think that's where a lot of marketers get hung up. So I'm really excited to get started. And with that in mind, Kim, I know just from the back and forth that you and I have had together, I know you have a lot of great thinking around marketing ROI and why we measure it. So why don't you kick us off with some of that thinking?
100%. So marketing can sometimes be looked as a cost center for a company, and its budgets are tight. We're going into a different time period in our lives after a global pandemic, and some people are uttering the words of a recession. So when we look at a cost center, we look at where can we cut spend, where can we optimize spend, but the real question here is where are we actually investing and getting a return on that investment? And today's customer, myself included, is more challenging than one of the past. We are demanding, we're very informed, so we have information at our fingertips. We covet personalization. We want to have the service offer be made and tailored to us and our businesses. And even more so, we're impatient. We want everything yesterday. So when we look at today's buyer, and we look at the reality that we only have so much money to spend in a global budget, how can we make the most impact? And in order to do so, you're going to have to put in place the right mechanisms and maybe sometimes tools and maybe processes so that you can actually go ahead, measure these activities, measure these campaigns, and decide over time what is in the best interest of your company. So beyond just having complicated or demanding clients, the marketplace is also changing. And Liz, I'll let you walk everybody through that.
Yeah, I think you set it up so nicely. I mean, just what isn't changing, right? And we absolutely have to have a pulse on that. And metrics and measurements help us do that. So outside of the customer behavior and mindset that you just mentioned, Kim, the marketplace itself is evolving, and unpredictable external environmental factors aside, like the one we just kind of got through, there are certain things that continually require us to pull on different levers and make sure we're measuring and tracking. And first is the competitive landscape. So no longer are the barriers to entry that used to exist. I mean, it's pretty easy to set up a company and at least purport to do what you say. And, the marketplace has just gotten so crowded. And in some cases, the perception is that the service or product you offer is commoditized. And so that's a pretty big hurdle to overcome. And that's just not going away anytime soon. Another dynamic that's really impacting the marketplace is just the velocity of M&A. So this is not new. I mean, this has been around for a while and it has happened with great speed and it's not stopping. I mean, in certain industries, it is the preferred pathway to growth. So this is just going to accelerate. And, some stats say it's stalling a bit, but the point here is that it is alive and well, and M&A does impact the type of marketing we do and the way we measure it and how we hold it accountable. Now, there's a couple other things I want to mention when it comes to the marketplace, and that is because of these changes, the effectiveness of one technique is going to fluctuate. I mean, think about email marketing, for example. Maybe 5 or 7 years ago or longer, that was like the thing. And everybody was latching on to email marketing because it was such an effective way to reach audiences. Well, it became flooded with spam. So all of a sudden the effectiveness of it dropped. And as you mentioned, Kim, as buyers became more informed and picky, fluffy email marketing doesn't cut it. And so any company that was investing in email marketing really had to raise their own bar and only send out emails that were highly educational, highly valuable, highly differentiated. So measuring how your email marketing, I'm just using that as an example, is performing is so important, because its efficacy is going to fluctuate as these changes take place. Technology, it does the same thing. And lastly, the fact that our geographic boundaries don't really have any import these days, it requires teams to really be on almost 24/7 to enable that customer experience that the picky, informed customers that you talked about, Kim, are looking for. So these are all important market dynamics that are going to continue to persist and are going to impact how we track. But you know, the interesting thing is that I think people on this call might be surprised to know the sheer volume of firms that actually aren't tracking business development or marketing metrics. Just look at this number. I mean, this is almost a quarter. And I think a lot of it is because it's overwhelming and firms don't really know what to track and how to report it, which is, you know, why we're doing this webinar today. But this stat came out of some of Hinge's research that we do annually, where we study the behavior of firms in the professional services marketplace. So that's a defined niche. And in this year's report, we found that 21% said they do not track these types of metrics. Now, Kim, I think you probably have some thoughts on why this is. I mean, it's pretty challenging. So why don't you walk us through some of those challenges that kind of make that 21% a reality?
Yes, and as a company operator, I would not accept that. So I don't know if your bosses are being super flexible, but as time goes forward, and companies grow and they become more robust, it's not okay to just throw it on the wall and see what sticks. You actually have to know what's going on. And so lots of different factors can play into the lack of being able to track your ROI. So a really basic one is not knowing what the KPIs or goals of your company are. So having maybe different departments or different leaders having different goals and not having that alignment internally to say, for us, it's profitability, or for us, it's, just to look at the chat, the click-through rate, because we care about audience attraction. And we're going to go through some examples of different things to track in your ROI across the buyer journey, but that's just one example. So do you have a grasp of your global KPIs in your company and also per department? Are you able also to track those? The next thing is multi-channel marketing initiatives. So doing one thing in marketing, which is a campaign, doing it across multiple channels, but not differentiating the different channels and how you track them. So that could be that you're promoting, at Big Bang, we have a printed copy of our No BS workbook, but we also have an online version, and we might show it today. We're going to give you a link. I'm tracking that link. When I give it out in person, it's a little bit more difficult to track that investment. So being able to track across multiple channels can be a challenge and also not often thought about. There may be too many cooks or systems that are not connected. So that means maybe you're working with an agency for your branding, an agency for your SEO, another one for AdWords. Are those agencies communicating on a similar metric style? And are you tracking them similarly? Or maybe your department's very big and you have people working just on social media, just on email marketing and blog content, and really being able to put those together at the end of the day. You may have technological barriers. The systems that you're using or the way that you set certain things up may not be able to allow for tracking. A very simple thing is, do you have your Google Analytics code embedded in your website? So that's just a very simple example of being able to track. or maybe your CRM and your marketing platform are not connected. So something like that. The next thing could be that you don't have a process defined. So you may have a new marketer that comes in and say, this is the way I'm going to do it, but they don't take into account maybe the historical data, which is again later on, but maybe each person is tracking ROI in a different way. You need some consistency there. As well, are you mapping campaigns consistently in the different ways that people are doing them? So does social media have the same goals as email marketing? If not, that's okay, but they need to be defined. Lacking expertise or time. So it's very easy to cut something and say, I don't have time to do it. Maybe you don't know how to do it. So welcome to this webinar. That's why you're here. And the last thing could be that you don't have benchmarking or historical data. So, you know, benchmarking can be amazing for your industry. There's a lot of studies available. I know Hinge has a lot of information on that, but also looking backwards and looking at your forecast, very important. So if you double your budget on something, are you going to have double the results? Not always. So to really consider how that spend is going to increase over time or make an impact over time. Sometimes spending 50% alternatively won't bring you half the results. So you really sometimes have to look at your historical data, make some assumptions, and test them as well. So those are some really common challenges. There may be some other very specific ones, but I think the first thing is saying, you know, we don't have a handle on this. How can we improve? And I think being here today is a very important start.
I think you're so right, Kim. You know, it's really interesting. I want to share some more data that came out of our research because it gets directly at what you were just walking us through. So that 21% that I talked about before, that came from a body of research where we, on an annual basis, study the differences in behavior, and marketing behavior is what I'm talking about, between firms that are growing well and have profitable growth at that. So we call those high growth firms versus no growth firms. And it's so interesting to study the differences in where these firms invest in marketing, the ROI they're getting, how they allocate their budgets, and so on. So one of the things we know is that 21% that I told you. Well, when you look at the differences between high growth firms that do not track metrics currently and no growth firms that don't track metrics, the number of no growth firms is double. So high growth firms are avid trackers of metrics and they regularly report on it. So what I'm showing you here are some kind of the between the lines details of why and how they're able to pull that off and why they have overcome some of the challenges that you just walked us through, Kim. So if you look at the left of this screen, almost a quarter of high growth firms have already gone through a digital transformation. This is not like a new thing for them or something that they're considering. Like this is something that that is already underway, and a quarter have already done it versus just 11% of no growth firms. So that's a big distinction. And then if you look on the right, in this same report, we also measured and quantified the degree of digital maturity between high growth and no growth firms. And you can see just a real stark difference here in the high growth. So the early stages are reactive, where you're just kind of figuring things out. And like some of those challenges that Kim mentioned, it's coming at you and you just don't have any answers. That's reactive. And over a third of no growth firms are in that category. Whereas high growth firms tend to be right in the middle. They are in this, they've been doing it. They are evolving this way. So that's one characteristic of high growth. And there's a nice positive correlation between digital maturity and which includes tracking digital metrics and growth and profitability. So let's take a look at another one. Another characteristic of high growth firms is that their marketing teams use metrics to make key decisions. I mean, they don't just report and say, here's the data. They're using it to make key decisions. And they are also, another reason we're here today, if you see the top data point, high growth firms are regularly studying the behavior of their target audience. In other words, they are studying the journey and they are implementing the understanding of that journey into their marketing. It's a very key point here. And then finally, I just want to put another bit of research in front of everybody to consider today. And this gets at some of the why would you measure? So when we're talking about ROI, we're not just talking about finding the numbers and using a database to spit out a dashboard, and then you say what the results are. If you scan across this chart here, you can see that high growth firms in particular are using the intel that they gather from their measuring and tracking to make informed decisions. So whether it's making better decisions on the overall company goals, like you see at the top, or if you look more towards the bottom, high growth firms are using metrics to inform decisions on what events do they go to, where should they be speaking, what type of marketing should they really be investing in. So this gets at the heart of the why. It's because metrics not only tell you how well you're doing, but it also, when you do it regularly, it is the foundational intel for the decisions you're making on your overall company goals. So Austin, I know we're probably have a bunch of questions right now, but I know we have a poll question that we want to ask of the participants today. So let me hand it over to you to do that.
Yeah, thanks, Liz. I think you guys just laid it out brilliantly about why it's so important to be tracking. And what we'd like to know at this stage as we go into the rest of the webinar is, how confident are you in your firm's approach to measuring ROI on your marketing? Are you very confident, somewhat confident, not confident, or would you fall into that category of firms and businesses that are still yet to start really systematizing an approach to tracking and including that in your marketing strategy? And like Liz said, please use the Q&A feature to let us know if you have any questions. We're about to go into some more great data. We're about to go into all the different points on ROI. We want to make sure we capture those questions. And if we don't get to them today, we'll definitely respond to you via email after the webinar. All right, well, a lot of folks have put in their response here. Let's take a look at what they say. So only a small percentage of folks are saying that they're very confident, Liz. Most people are falling into that middle category, somewhat confident or not confident, right? Wanting to, maybe they've started, maybe they've had, that some things are systematized, but there's always room for improvement. I don't think that's surprising that most of us are feeling like we're in that category. Anything stand out to you, either of you here on the poll results?
I mean, I think it's crazy how this is echoing what we found in our own research. I mean, it's like right on the nose. The poll showed that 20% said they're, not tracking. So that, we have to start somewhere. So the first step is acknowledging that it's not happening, and then using information like what we're sharing today to kind of make the case in your company for how to do it.
I think there's just always room for improvement on this. I've been doing it for a long time, working for a technology company. I'm 8 years at Big Bang, so I have every tool available to me at my fingertips, and still it's something that we talk about every year. How are we going to improve our methodology of ROI tracking as it comes to marketing? Do we want to extend the customer lifetime value? Do we want to shorten it? Small adjustments, and sometimes looking at two things side by side. So it's one of those studies of life, and it doesn't end with just one conversation, but getting started, I think, is the most important thing, so that you do have the ability to look forwards and backwards.
Could not agree more. Well, with that poll underway, I think now it's a good time to pivot to another topic of discussion, and that is our buyers and the journey they take as they get to know us and make their final selection. And the reason we're talking about this is because this really is the corollary to measuring and tracking and deciding what to measure and what to invest in. So let's just start by thinking about what we mean by buyers. So this isn't only and always your direct customer. When we think of buyers, there are several different points in the decision-making process, if you will, and several different voices and perspectives that influence whether you get on their radar, stay on their radar, and get selected. So one of your buyer audiences is your direct customer. We'll call them the decision makers. So those who are, at the end of the day, are going to sign the check or sign the DocuSign or whatever it is they sign to select you, and they say yay or nay. You know, that's a primary audience, and you really must understand what factors influence them throughout their entire decision-making process. But speaking of influence, there's also another type of audience that we think is very important to understand, and that's what we call influencers. So these are, you know, think of how alive and well referrals are. Well, you know, if I go to somebody and you know, I'm looking for a technology solution, and I say, you know, hey, Austin, who do you know out there? And he refers me to Kim. Well, Austin's the influencer. And so these are your trusted peers and your trusted circle, your trusted network that you regularly go to to find out who else is out there. So we might call them specifically referral sources as a kind of influencer, which is the third. But then another aspect of this influencer category is just general visible experts who are out there giving information and educating us all, and people we regularly go to. We respect their opinion on trusted partners and trusted solution providers. So that's a really important, whether it's like a visible expert kind of influencer or a referral source influencer. This is a very, very important category to know how they get to know about firms like us, because you want to be on their radar too. And then a couple other categories to consider. I mentioned thought leaders. Well, media outlets and folks who are regularly authoring thought leadership and regularly on the speaking circuit and so on, you also want to be on their radar, because they will often, either if you're on their radar, the media outlets can go to you to get quoted in publications and so on. You can raise your visibility that way, or the thought leaders themselves, while they've got the stage, whether it's literal or not, can make reference to you as a company. And so you want to be on their radar, and you want to know how these folks learn about companies like you. And then finally, talent. So potential job candidates are an excellent perspective to study, because they also are heavy referral sources, heavy influencers, and they have their own journey. So it's really, when we talk about buyers, we're not just talking about someone who signs the check at the end of the day. It's really this whole universe of people who have some part in deciding whether you get on someone's radar, stay there, and ultimately get selected. Now, this section really is not just about the buyer, but it's kind of making the case for studying the journey that they take. So why should we invest in this type of research? Why should we go to the extent of understanding the ins and outs of the journey that they take? Well, it's really important to do that, because if your marketing is off kilter with how these people behave, then you're not going to be in the right channels. You're not going to have the right messaging. You're not going to have the right frequency. You're not going to be aware of who you're competing with and what messages your buyers get exposed to when they're out there learning. And so all of those things are really important lenses to consider. And that is the answer to, what do you research? You want to know at the end of the day, what kept your buyer up at 4 a.m. when they woke up and they had that thought and they could not go back to sleep because there's not a good answer. They get up hours later. What do? What's the first thing they do when they're learning? Do they go online? If so, where? With what keywords are they searching? Do they go to their peers? If so, to whom? And what questions are they asking? So all of these things are really important to understand when we talk about understanding the buyer journey. Now, just a couple other things, and then I want to turn to Kim because I know you have some thoughts on the actual stages of the journey itself. But if we understand that we need to look at our buyers and what exactly to study about them, then the question becomes how. Well, most companies have some kind of internal data that they can reference, data that they've collected and is housed in their CRM or other marketing automation tools. And that's certainly important because it's going to inform, it's going to help you know at least the extent to what you've collected. And you can also use secondary research, although I always caution this a little bit. Secondary research, is usually stuff that you can purchase. It's rarely up to date. There's always a starting and a stop point. And so it's a little bit less reliable, but I think secondary research can sometimes be a nice benchmark or sort of a sounding board or a confirmation of what you're finding with your internal data. But I think what we have found in our years of doing this is that nothing beats primary research. So actually having structured conversations and doing this on a periodic basis. And this is a practice of high growth firms that we saw a couple slides ago. But making sure that in an objective manner, you're really understanding through primary research how your audiences behave at each stage of the journey. And we have found that usually to get the most candid, objective data out of this, you really should align with a third party, because you can imagine you're having a conversation with your customers and when you have that conversation, you're automatically introducing a bias into the conversation just because it's you. But when you have an objective third party who knows how to do this, that bias has been eliminated and you get more, you get valuable data. And I just want to end this part by, speaking of value of data, there are several benefits that come out of doing this type of research. First and foremost, I talked about that objectivity. Well, I don't know how many of us on the call today, if we're being super honest with ourselves, can think of a time or maybe several times when our subjective feelings got into our ultimate decisions on the type of marketing we do, or the type of messaging, or how we even position our company. That happens all the time because we build these blind spots internally and we become very subjective about our audience. So research can overcome that. The other power of research is that it can help teams that don't normally work together on a daily basis. So we'll call that cross-functional. It can bring them into alignment because they're looking at the same buyer through the same lens, through the same objectivity. Research can do another thing that is where almost every company stumbles, and that is, how are we different? How are we truly and meaningfully differentiated as a company, and how do we get that messaging out there? And research is really the only objective way to find out how you are differentiated and then filter that in through your messaging. And then finally, it can, I'm talking about objectivity and subjectivity quite a bit, but internally, we can form some pretty stubborn thinking about how our audiences learn and how they behave, why we win, why we lose. And oftentimes research will challenge that. And there's nothing like data that helps teams just turn that thinking around. It's like turning a big ship around, but data can really help teams rally around the truth, the objective truth, as opposed to this internal thinking that is so inherent in companies as we grow and scale. So research is just very, very powerful. And I think, it speaks for itself that this is a primary habit of high growth companies. So Kim, I wonder if with sort of that as the backdrop, maybe you can help us understand the stages of the buyer journey.
100%. So, I think the first thing is to understand that this research, whether it be based historically, benchmarked, come up with your direction team coming through some, great or executive team, or even just speaking with your customers, a variety of that, or potential customers or buyers. Gathering that data is the first step, and then that will give you insights into your buyer journey. So, of course, this buyer journey can be living and breathing as well. And I think the first most important thing is to have a draft of it and something that you agree on at your company internally and that you can move forward with, because it's not just a marketing department buyer journey. It ends up being company-wide and understanding of the different roles and responsibilities of each department and stakeholder. Then you have to consider that ROI can be broken into campaigns and also stages of the buyer journey. And maybe sometimes a campaign will touch multiple stages. So it could be something that you offer a new customer, but also something you use for retention. And how do you divide that, as well as report on it separately? Or do you blend it together and that's how your benchmark is for that one campaign? Understanding the journey will also help you over time to see where you can make improvements and where you want to invest. You may decide to put more of your investment into the awareness, or you may decide, you know what, we are known in our marketplace. We actually care more about retention of our customers. And we all know that retaining a customer is actually cheaper than going and acquiring a new one. So often I say to the team, let's fix any internal leaks before we look outside of the company for something new. And then basically the rest of our webinar today will actually dive into these 5 stages of the buyer journey. So we're going to go into some examples of each one and how to track the ROI. And we'll do our best to answer any questions at the end. All right, let's get started. Liz, the awareness stage.
So, I mean, this is the most challenging one, because if we don't get this right, then we really don't get to the other stages in an efficient or an effective manner. So the awareness stage really has 2 primary objectives here. Number one, you want to attract the attention from those prospective buyers and audiences who've never ever heard of you before. In other words, you can't just build your pipeline assuming that people are going to Google your name and get to you or get that referral. So you also have to build it by getting on the radar of folks who have never ever heard of you before. And the other objective here, in addition to just getting on that radar, is then communicating the relevance that you have to your target audience's key issues and top priorities. So if you're, if you have a software tool that's like a project management tool, and your audience's top priority, they love the project management tool, they use it all the time, but if their top priority is, let's say, top line profitability, well, in your messaging, you've got to, even if your project management software doesn't directly address top line profitability, in your messaging, you have to show awareness for that as the issue, and how tight project management and careful project management and judicious project management can ultimately get them there. So that's what I'm talking about, is just making sure that you're communicating in a way that's relevant, so that when someone who is a stranger sees that messaging, they're like, oh, those guys get me. This is exactly what I was thinking. We were talking about this in the boardroom this morning and nobody else is talking about this. So that's kind of the goal here. And the steps, if you will, are moving that complete stranger down to a marketing qualified lead and ultimately a sales qualified lead, so that you can nurture them in a meaningful way. Now, there's an important component to the awareness stage, and that is visibility. And when we talk about visibility, we're talking about on-site, that is on your website, because that is a primary tool, whether you like it or not. That is where we are primarily getting judged and vetted as companies. So you've got to have that on-site, the tools to have on-site visibility as well as off-site. So out in the world, other than your website. And I think it's a balance, right? You can't only have a great website and invest in keywords and have all this amazing content if it only lives on your website. You have to get that content out there and available as a guest blogger. So be tapped as a guest speaker in a publication where your audience is reading, or get on that stage, get great reviews, awards that are important to your audience that make an impact when they see it. So all of this works in concert. You can't only have the offsite and have a great onsite, and vice versa. So this is just something, kind of a model to keep in mind when you're trying to build awareness. It is both about onsite and offsite. And I just want to share another piece of data here. Why, what's the confirmation behind this? Why are we talking about this? Well, this is from a body of research we did where this is different from studying high growth and no growth firms. This body of research, we actually studied the buyer themselves. And one of the things we examined is, how are they, I use that example, like your decision maker wakes up at 4 a.m., can't go back to sleep. Well, a couple hours later, what are the steps they do, and in what order of magnitude, when they're learning about something that is keeping them up as the top priority? And you can see here that these are measured on a scale of 0 to 10, where 10 is the most frequent. And you can see that they're either asking their peers or doing a general web search. Now, this is really important because we do this research on a frequent basis, and we have seen, doing a general web research was not always at the top here. It used to be closer to the middle. It is quickly growing as the top way that decision makers are learning. So that's when I said, whether we like it or not, we're getting judged and vetted by our digital visibility. I mean, this is kind of putting it there as confirmation. Now, let's wrap up this first stage, awareness, with talking about, how do you measure? How do you know if you're being effective at this stage? Now, depending on what you're doing as a company and who you are and who your decision makers are, there's a whole bunch of things that you could potentially measure. But what I wanted to point out here is, I think it's really helpful for companies to think about what they're measuring in certain meaningful categories. So first is just, if you look at the top left quadrant here, the implementation, and knowing how much time you're taking versus the cost of a particular technique to get on the radar of someone. It's really important at this stage. I mean, you're going to measure that throughout all the stages, but it's important to start here so that you know if the early things you're doing are working properly. So certain things around implementation, and is your staff latching onto it? Is everybody utilizing the technique, and so on? Now, the other categories that are important are visibility and expertise. So if you look at the top right of this quadrant, when you're building awareness, you can measure your web traffic and the composition of your web traffic. You can measure social media followers. Is your email list size growing? Are you increasingly participating in events? These are all excellent barometers of your effectiveness at the awareness stage, because it has an indication of how visible you are. And you also want to measure, is your expertise being increasingly received? Because today's buyers are looking for experts, even when they're buying a tool or a process or a widget. There's expertise behind that makes it different from just your average provider. So some things you can measure to see if your expertise is growing in terms of receptivity are downloads. So do you have a piece of content that your audience can download? If so, what's happening to the conversions? Is it increasing? What about, I talked about traffic earlier to your website. What about traffic to the places on your website where you're housing valuable content? Is that growing? What about earned media coverage? Are you increasingly getting sought out for quotes and mentions or speaking engagement? So these are good barometers of how you're tracking in terms of building awareness around your expertise. And then finally, on the lower right quadrant here is just pure solid impact. So what's happening to your inbound leads? Is that growing? Are your leads turning into opportunities? You know, everybody here probably uses slightly different nomenclature, but like I said before, are strangers turning into MQLs, turning into SQLs? So these are all things that you can think about measuring at that early stage that we're defining as awareness. Now, once you move past the awareness stage and hopefully you're on people's radar, you've stayed on their radar, how do you get selected? So the selection stage involves a couple of different objectives here. First and foremost is you aim to nurture the people on whose radar you've finally or you kind of got on their radar. You want to have relevant and differentiated nurture campaigns. So you want to be able to track their behavior. What are they downloading? What are they doing next? What are they interested in? And make sure that you've got a targeted campaign to keep putting information in front of them. That's how you stay on the radar. And this, by the way, is how you achieve the second objective, which is be seen as the trusted advisor, but don't ever say that. Don't ever say those words, because if speaking of undifferentiated and tired messaging, I mean, that's it. Everyone is the trusted advisor, but we just can't say it. And so you want to do these things so that you're staying on the radar and ultimately converting to a sale. So this selection stage is really important, but it often doesn't happen unless you've built relevant awareness. Now, let's take a look at some data here that we have from buyers about how they are behaving in this selection stage. So first, I want to take a look at evaluation. Evaluation is just like they're cultivating a list of firms to consider. You know, maybe it's 5, maybe it's 10, then they're going to whittle down that list to maybe their top 2 or 3. And just take a look at what's important here and how prevalently expertise plays into the equation. It's the very first one. Also relevant experience, but then also the team. Who's the team? Who's the implementation team? What are their skills? So this, you see a real embracing here of expertise and it's a way that companies can really differentiate when they're selling solutions and products and services to stay on the radar. Now, how do you get selected? Well, that's on the right here. And you see from our data that relationship actually trumps everything else. The trick is you really don't get invited to the relationship table unless you've been proficient at building awareness, being seen as a trusted, authoritative advisor. So these all kind of play in concert here, but isn't that interesting to think about the journey that someone takes? And it's not just relationship. You can't enter the equation with relationship, try to stay on the radar with relationship, and then close the deal with relationship. It's important, but in order of magnitude, it's not the top criteria earlier on. So let's round out this stage by talking about how you measure here. So first is just your feedback. You should always be tapping into the buyer's feedback so that you're understanding how they got to you, why they selected you. And that should be captured, measured, reported on, studied. It should be talked about in cross-functional marketing and business development teams so that you know if you're turning the dials and the right dials on your marketing. So you get more of these deals in place. And that gets to the second thing, just sharing that information. You know, when you get that feedback from the buyer, and Kim, you've probably lived this on a daily basis too, but it isn't just get the information and keep it within the halls of marketing and then you go off and do your thing. I mean, every single department within the company needs this intel because we all have an impact on how often and with what kind of frequency and with what kind of cycle we're bringing in and closing deals.
Without a doubt. We need to share it because having it and then just keeping it is almost worse than not having it at all because you've invested in being able to gather that data. So now you have to maximize it, whether it be learning from it or doing some statistical analysis or just being able to better deliver for that customer. I mean, we are talking about providing service, so we do have to adapt to the customer's needs at the end of the day.
I could not agree more. And the types of things you want to share are not just the feedback, but some hard stats like what's our win rate, you know, or closing ratio, as some people might call it. What about the sales cycle itself? Is it growing? Is it shrinking? Is it going in the right direction? And by what types of customers? And are we making headway in one vertical and not enough in another? So all of these things are really important barometers of whether we are succeeding at the selection stage. So now, Kim, I want to turn it over to you because there's a lot of stuff that happens in the journey once we've won the business. So why don't you take us through that?
No problem. So it's time to deliver, right? So our goal is to keep our customers satisfied and to retain the client, but not at any expense. And that's unfortunate, but the reality. We have to deliver our promise and our brand value and what we said we would do throughout the sales cycle, but also to manage the cost of delivery and look towards profitability. So depending on how you actually bill your customers, it can be impacted differently for time and material, which is where you bill for the time you've spent with a client. And the goal is to ensure value so they repurchase, because normally time and material is not guaranteed in any way with a long-term service contract. If you do fixed bid, you're probably looking to complete the tasks in the most profitable way possible. So whether that's using or leveraging more junior resources, training them, mentoring them so that they become more proficient at a better cost, or just doing it in less time. And if you're doing a monthly service contract, you want to ensure, again, a repurchase, maybe an upgrade of the service that you're offering, or just referrals and general satisfaction. So when we look at delivery, don't forget to look at what is your current process, and that impacts the tools that you'll use to measure this. What is your business process? What are the implementation or service that you're providing? How can you break that down into segments? For example, you may have some core services that you offer, and then you may be more or less profitable with some additional services that you offer. You might offer them purely because they're more profitable and it's in your wheelhouse, or it could be for ease for your customer. So it might be slightly less profitable, but make their experience better. You also have to look at billing. Are you billing on time? Are you collecting properly? Are people paying their bills? And then also looking to supporting your client beyond the initial contract. So depending on how you're set up, that might be in monthly, or that may be a repurchase. So how do you measure this delivery rate? The delivery stage, pardon me. So you can look at the burn rate. How quickly are you going through the project based off of the amount of time you've assumed it will take to do that project. So if it's a monthly categorization, are you at the 15th of the month and you're halfway done or 60% done? So there's something called burn rate. Project completion, it could be a much longer project or shorter project. How far are you in the project versus your profitability? You can actually ask your clients throughout their experience after maybe a working session or that you've delivered part of the mandate. You can ask for customer satisfaction. It can be verbal, or you can actually send them a survey. Different ways of doing this, as long as you're tracking it. And it could be both ways and you track it jointly. You can look at the profitability and gross margin. So this would often be in a professional services tool, tracking tool. There's a lot out there, simple ones, more complicated ones for time tracking. And this would be very important to be able to forecast not only what you're doing this week, but what's happening in your organization in months to come, so that you can actually plan your staffing as well. Account receivable, so the collection of payments. You can look at open ARR. You can actually look at how many days it takes for an average client to pay. You can look at outstanding invoices. Obviously, someone who is not paying, either they're having an internal challenge or they're not satisfied with the work that you've done. So really getting on top of anything that's outstanding is very important. And upsell. Have you been able to sell to your clients again? Are they repurchasing? So that's really important. All right. So I think we have another poll, or I know we have another poll. Austin, if you want to launch it, I'll let you explain it to everyone.
Yeah, absolutely, Kim. I can't think of, of all the sections we've looked at today, I can't think of, one where technology really needs to play a big role if you're going to be measuring things effectively. And we're interested, how satisfied are you with your firm's current technology solutions for tracking across the buyer journey? It could be in those earlier phases, like Liz was talking, how you're measuring, some of that marketing ROI, some of the effectiveness and impact of your marketing, or all the way up through this delivery, like Kim has been talking about. What would you rate your satisfaction level with where you're at? Do you have the technology that you have? Is the tool, have you upgraded recently? Are you thinking about upgrading? Factor that in as you answer this. Are you satisfied, unsatisfied, very unsatisfied? Let's take a look at where everybody is at. So I'm going to share those results. And it looks like the majority are unsatisfied, which is, I guess, surprising. I mean, we know that there's so many technology providers out there that support, in the delivery phase, in the marketing phase, and competition is heating up, and there are better tools coming out into the market every day. Kim, what do you think of these results here in terms of the satisfaction levels?
I'm not surprised in the sense that where do companies start to invest? They invest in finance, they invest in certain tools, and somehow marketing ends up being the last one in. So we often see, and you'll see in the No BS workbook that we do send your way, that, there's a pyramid, and finance is at the bottom, then it's production, then it's relations, and then it's marketing. And I think it gets harder and harder to make those investments for companies as they move up that pyramid. But understanding where your pain points are is really important, and being able to connect systems or look at one system that can help you with everything is really valuable. And, it's something that you can improve with some easy, simple things. So it's a challenge for a lot of people. Whenever I speak to a business operator, they're like, what am I doing? And, you'll be surprised that it's not as complicated as it might seem to be. So sometimes the PSA tool, professional services automation, where you're tracking your time and where you're most profitable, can actually really inform the marketing team. So sometimes it's just about sharing that data across the company and who has access to that data.
Excellent. Well, why don't you take us through the next couple of stages here? I know
All
we're
right.
approaching the top of the hour, but for those of you who can hang on, we are in our final two stages here, and then we'll get to some
I'll
questions.
make them short and sweet, so no problem. So retention, we mentioned that the cost of acquiring a new customer is more expensive in every industry than retaining the ones that you have. It's not always possible, but that's the goal. So how can you retain your customer? You can nurture them, you can take them out for dinner, you can call them on the phone. There's a multitude of ways of doing it and tracking it. You may want to upsell or do renewal. And one of the things that you might do is actually see how you can leverage their customer success to gain new clients. So can they give you a reference? Will they participate in a case study? Will they participate in a webinar that you give, or an event that you go in person, or even give you a kudos online? So that could be at the end of your customer satisfaction survey, those who have positive results, you might automatically send them to a website like Google. Maybe there's a different platform that's more relevant for your business to give you a positive review. Can you ask them personally to make that review for you? Again, this has to do with the values of your company, and also what are the goals and like where will the impact be greatest. So I'm not saying everybody should add it to the end of their customer survey or put it in their project closure or annual review, but I'm saying there are moments where it is appropriate to ask your client for that favor, and depends on your company and your goals and what your competition is doing, you'll be able to make a decision as to where to invest that energy. So with that, how can we measure? Customer satisfaction surveys, sometimes known as Net Promoter Score. How likely are you to recommend your company or the company you work for to a friend, colleague, or family member? So this question is actually the #1 predictor of long-term profitability of a company, as cited when I was back in university by Harvard. And it continues to be the #1 metric that marketers look at for customer satisfaction. That's 1 to 10 scale. You can look at the public praise that we just spoke about. You can look at the attendance of the meetings. Again, stakeholders who are disinterested will stop showing up to meetings or meetings that they're invited to. Customer story participation. So that could be a case study. That could be for internal use. That could be for reference. That could be, again, for a big marketing campaign. Maybe even attending an event with you and speaking for your company. Customer referral participation. Do they send customers your way? Do they recommend you? And then engagement with a marketing asset. So that could be as complicated as, with tracking as a traditional, like a billboard, where you might make an offer or something like that, or really simple, like we're going to send you the Big Bang No BS workbook, and I'll know who clicked that link and, maybe who downloaded it, and we know that there's more engagement there. And renewal contracts and affiliate service. So if there's more that is coming from that customer, obviously that they're engaged and they're seeing value in your service. When we look at the next stage, it's not always the sexiest one to talk about. It's a former client, but there is a real impact there. So when we talk about a former client, this could be a client that you lost and, needs change, stakeholders change. At the end of the day, people are buying from people. Individuals are making those decisions, and someone may change companies, or maybe the needs of their company changed. And when they switch companies, you have two things: a new stakeholder at the old company, and you have someone who already knows your brand at the new company. And so what's really important is these former customers, whether it ended on a good note or not, still will impact your brand in a big way, because they will be the ones talking about your company, their experience. And maybe you just didn't align because they weren't ready, or their growth goals have changed, or stuff like that. So what's important is if you lose a customer, you track the reason. You start to understand if there's a trend. Is everyone going to one competitor? Well, then maybe you need to switch up your service offering, or maybe you're having a pricing problem. You want to keep in touch with them, because you might offer new services or products in the future that maybe would be a good or better fit for them as their needs progress. And you have to look for signs and symptoms that you can share with your customer success team or account managers to avoid this with other customers similar to them. And if you fire a client, which happens, maybe they were really mean to your staff, or it just didn't fit, or they weren't paying their bills, you want to make sure you track that. So if somebody reaches out from their company, maybe again, it's a new stakeholder, you just kind of can have a moment and rediscuss the ways of working together to avoid that challenge emerging again. And you want to make sure that your records are updated. So for example, in your CRM, your customer relationship management tool, you can have like a little note saying this client was fired. so that if somebody does reach out from that company again, you can pass it to the right stakeholder at your own organization to deal with that type of situation. So when we look at the former client stage, there's a couple of things we can measure. The lost reason, very important. How can we restart the buyer journey? Because there is a version of this where you're not regurgitating all the information about your company, but you are sharing potentially some new information or information that's pertinent to them, or kind of getting them back into the habit of looking at you for thought leadership. You can also have your sales team do touch points. Could be 4 months, 6 months, 1 year, depending on what you're offering, maybe calling them before their budget season. You know a lot about your customer, so being able to leverage that to your advantage is very important. And then also tracking those initiatives. Have they actually rebought? Have they been re-onboarded as a customer? Those are really key things at the end of the day. So if you've lost somebody, are you able to see the later on close one ratio of that? So just to finish up, a couple minutes over, but from Big Bang, you will see in your email a NoBS digital transformation workbook. We actually don't mention system names because we have so many. And at the end of the day, the systems that you should be using at your company should be ones that are compatible with what you're doing today and where you're heading. This is a free workbook. I always say that if every client were to actually take the time and read this and understand that digital transformation is just about helping your organization grow and scale, understanding some buzzwords, but also putting your priorities down, like what are your real challenges? You'll find inside of this NoBS workbook a glossary of terms. You'll actually have a free assessment within it. You'll be able to map out your pain points. It's not very long, but it's very informative, and it can be great for you and your team. And from there, our team can offer you a free consultation to walk you through the results of your challenges. And we can get into very specifics. You know, if you tell us that you're using a certain platform already, like Salesforce or HubSpot, or you're looking for a CRM, we can also suggest some really strong, robust tools that will fit in with those. So you don't have to make enormous changes organizationally. So this is something that we will send along. It's available on our website. And I'm actually really happy to walk through it with anybody that has further questions. So just reach out to me directly. And then I know that Hinge is going to offer a nice consultation.
Yeah, so I love yours, Kim. I think that everyone should download that, and we would invite anyone on the call today to talk with us as well. And this would be for a conversation around how you have or haven't been challenged with your ROI. And a lot of times people like to use us as a sounding board to see if they're tracking the right things, if they're doing the right things, et cetera. So love to have that conversation with you. And if you're interested in that, feel free to reach out.
Absolutely.
And if there's anything that Big Bang can help with, Hinge is our partner. So they'll just reach out to us and let us know if there's something specific in your consultation that technologically you need help with.
For sure.
Head on.
Absolutely. And I've dropped the link for both of these offers here in the webinar chat, the link for Big Bang's workbook, and also the link for our consultation offer. But as you can see, I've already launched a poll, and you can use that too. If you'd like to speak with Hinge, if you'd like to talk to Liz, if you'd like to talk to one of the Hinge experts here, just go ahead and click yes, or yes, but not yet. And we'll keep in touch with you and follow along with how your marketing program is developing. Great. All right. Well, we have reached the end of the webinar, but we have some time here for questions for those of you who would like to stay on for an extra couple of minutes. We got so many great questions. So even though we won't be able to get to all of them today, we will respond to some of you via email later today or by the end of the week, just with some answers and some of our thoughts on your questions. But why don't we start with this question that we got earlier from Todd. Kim, I was hoping you could answer this one. Todd had a great question. He said, how do you help clients distinguish between meaningful data and meaningless data so that they don't get stuck looking at the wrong metrics?
I think at the end of the day, it always starts with what's the KPI of the organization and what are the drivers that change business for you. So, for example, you would be shocked to know that even though my marketing team looks at the amount of traffic we get to the website, I actually really put a lot more emphasis for our leaders at the company of how many forms were filled out or how many assets were downloaded. So I think it's being able to put them in a list and deciding which are really key KPI factors for you. And that comes from the expertise of your marketing team, but also feedback from the leaders of your company. So there's a mix, and also looking at your competitors over your shoulder is never a bad idea. So seeing what is really moving the needle for them as well can be great. Having maybe sometimes a secret shopper or a client who can give you insights as to how it was somewhere else, or maybe even talking to a competitor. Sometimes we speak with our competitors and share knowledge in a very friendly way, because at the end of the day, there is enough room for a lot of us to exist in the marketplace. We just all have our different way and different niche. So you want to really be critical with yourself. I would say that for each activity, you already in your gut know what's the most important thing, and that's what drove, new conversion of business or retention. And so that would be where I would focus my energy and look at other things as supporting factors. So for example, in this case where we're saying webinar signups, that's something supporting for potentially someone to actually reach out to us later.
That's great. Liz, we got a question from Gordon, and I'm going to try to summarize it a little bit. We know that in professional services, sometimes the sales process can be a lot longer, right? It can stretch on months. It can stretch on over a year in some cases. What are some of the key ROI metrics that are important to us in tracking some of these sales that have a little bit of a longer sales cycle? What are some of the more important things to be considering on that front?
Well, that is an interesting question. I don't know that it would be different. What we would track would be different because of a lengthier sales cycle. I think the sales cycle in and of itself is, what an important thing to track. But if I understand the question right, I think it's getting at why is the sales cycle lengthier than we're anticipating. And, when that's the case, there are some things beyond metrics that you're going to take a look at, like what's going on externally and what's going on in the competitive landscape. And sometimes you don't have metrics to bear those out. So I think your standard sales pipeline metrics, time to close, looking at services, is there any difference across the services you're selling? And are some closing faster than others? Are some of your services seeming to not resonate? So Kim talked eloquently about getting current customer feedback. Is there anything about your current service mix that isn't resonating with your audience? And that might be the reason. So I would track those things and balance that with external data just to see if you can figure out what's going on with the longer sales cycle.
I'll also add that there's different stages within a sale. And so being able to look at those and saying, what's the probability of close? And sometimes if something stays too long in a certain early stage, that the probability of closing is much lower versus moving through those first few stages eloquently. And we look at that because we offer implementations of software, but also support or full business systems analysis. So for us, one example is if someone's going for a government grant, we know the sales cycle will be longer because we need to go through that process. Or if we're doing a full implementation, it's going to be a longer sales cycle because it's a bigger decision to make versus maybe just fixing one simple error. Mm-hmm. So getting down to the nitty-gritty of like each stage and the duration per stage, but also related to the cost of the service, that can be something that can be very meaningful as well. And I'm not saying you should look at these every day. You're going to do this as like a quarterly or annual activity and then start to say, well, that one really tells me a big story. And then you're going to make sure that you see that KPI more regularly than the rest in a dashboard, ideally fed in automatically.
I think we have time for one more. Kim, we had a question here from Chanel, who said, our firm's CRM platform is an Excel spreadsheet. Is there a better CRM platform that can be used for accounting firms?
Without a doubt. I promise you it exists. It depends on your business process, depends on your budget. Listen, an Excel spreadsheet or a Google document shared spreadsheet is better than pen and paper. It's better than doing it, ad hocly, but you're doing a lot of things manually over and over again that potentially could be automated and save you time and let your team do more rewarding work, and also avoid the requirement for dual entry and stuff like that. So there is a plethora of solutions. One thing that's great about Big Bang is I think we have more than 5 different financial ERP software available to us, core great solutions, and we can walk through the different price points. Even if it's not something that we offer, we would still suggest it to you, because at the end of the day, you'd be our future client for something else when you would outgrow maybe potentially a smaller software. So anything from a QuickBooks to a Sage Intacct to a NetSuite to Financial Force, Microsoft Dynamics, there are a plethora of tools out there that can really give you great insights and help your team not only work a little bit more collaboratively, but with a little bit more impact as well.
Excellent.
That's our favorite client, is someone who's like, we want to just improve something that's pretty basic. And if you have that historical data, we can help you with it.
Terrific. Well, Liz and Kimberly's contact information is there on the screen. If you have any other questions for them, or you want to learn more about Hinge or Big Bang, you can see that their contact information is there on the screen. Liz, Kim, thank you guys so much for the great presentation today. And thank you to all of the attendees who joined today. We know that you also have very busy schedules, so it means a lot for you to take the time out of your day and engage with us on these webinars. Thank you so much and have a great day.
Thank you so much.